Mike, welcome to the Predictable B2B Success podcast. You're the founder of Malloy Industries Consulting Group that helps B2B SaaS companies scale their operations with the support of fractional executives and leadership, of course. Now, for the last 3 years, I believe you've been in this space of executive matchmaking. You've engaged 200 plus skilled executives under whose expertise you've helped businesses scale from 2 million to 20 million and beyond, optimizing sales, profits, and time. You've, of course, got 15 plus years of experience behind you. A couple of major career milestones would be your time at Deloitte as a senior consultant, CEO of Waveborn Sunglasses, and the Halcyon Incubator as program director. I believe you also help three entrepreneurs to successfully pitch and secure deals on Shark Tank, and you serve as adjunct professor and entrepreneur in residence over at Georgetown University. That's certainly a glowing resume, so to speak, and I'm sure it's held you in good stead with what you're doing at the moment. But I'm curious, given your career trajectory with consulting and as CEO, etc., why start Malloy Industries in the first place?
Great question, Vinay, and thanks again for having me on the podcast. There was a few years ago a small global pandemic.
I do,
Do you
yes.
remember that one? That hit you? Yeah. And so during the pandemic, my wife and we had been married about 6 months, and then we're trapped inside in a one-bedroom basement apartment with not a lot of natural light and unreliable internet. So we decided to leave Washington, D.C. and move to the beach in Delaware. And so I was able to continue teaching at Georgetown and running the Halcyon Incubator from Delaware. But 9 months later, they said, hey, we get to come back to the office. And that was really the forcing function that started Malloy Industries. And, initially it was kind of the Mike Malloy single shingle. I'm going to help people with some sales, marketing, fundraising, consulting. And after a few months, I realized that it wasn't a scalable business, but it was just Mike's billable hours. And a couple things happened in my life as well, kind of inflected at that point. One was that my wife told me she was pregnant with our first son, our chief cuteness officer, who's about to be 3, and may or may not make a cameo in the background of this podcast. And the same week we found that news out, my mom actually passed away unexpectedly. And yeah, it was a real shock to the system and made me reflect on life and family and what I want to do with my time. And I really wanted to be a dad. For Max, since the first 2 years of his life, I was the primary caregiver and able to kind of build this business while working at home. And my wife had a day job as well. And excited to see everything it's grown into. And, my wife has actually retired, so to speak, now to be home with our son. And I'm able to focus on building this business and stuff.
I would imagine, sorry, giving you a journey to, I'm curious, what would you say would be your best area of strength?
Oh, great question. It's absolutely pattern recognition and kind of matching existing solutions or connecting people who I know how to do certain things with people who have those problems. I've seen a lot of startups, both from my own journey with Waveborn Sunglasses and running the Halcyon Incubator. I helped more than 100 entrepreneurs through that program. And there's a lot of similar patterns that repeat that, okay, at this point, you need this thing to, there's some constraint, there's some ceiling blocking your growth. How do we solve for that such that, okay, you can make it the next step up and the next step, whether that's a resource or a template, a toolkit, or an expert who can come in and kind of show you.
And in that area of strength, what would you say is something that businesses don't know but should?
What got you
Hmm.
here won't get you there. Getting to that first million in revenue, there's a lot of brute force, trial and error. Founders can just work more and more hours and pretend like they're not going to get burnt out, although they inevitably do. But to go from 1 to 5 to 10 million, you have to do things differently, and you really need the scalable systems and processes and the ability to delegate to people who are smarter than you. Hiring junior staff or interns or mid-level managers is not typically the
Hmm.
right solution. And I think a corollary to this is it's better to ask
Hmm.
who, not how. There's a great Dan
Yep.
Sullivan, Ben Hardy book. You know, who's going to get you to that next level? You don't have to worry about how they're going to do it because they know how to do it.
And perhaps we could dive into some of those a little bit later. But when you started out, you were operating by yourself. You've certainly scaled at this point in time. But when you started out, did you actually sit down and define the values by which you would operate, or did that come a little bit later?
Great question. And I'm smiling because I quit my job at 34 and married, which was very different than when I quit my Deloitte
Hmm.
job at 25 and single. I basically, the first time, talked to my dad, and I was like, yeah, I think I'm going to quit. I'm going to do this next thing. Like, at 34 and married, I had to make a whole PowerPoint presentation for my wife. I had to have financial models to show my wife that, hey, I think this is going to work. Like, give me the summer. We'll see what happens. And I learned a lot through the first business that made me much better the second one. And for the listeners who don't know, I'm not going to bury the lead. I went bankrupt at 30. Like, the first one did not work out. I had to do business and personal bankruptcy. I moved back to my parents' basement. Like, it was a dip for sure. And on this second business, and I'll get to your question about the values too. I don't think that was in the first presentation to my wife, but I did do it within the first like 3 months that summer. And really went through like a deep reflection exercise on like, what are my core values? How do I want to show up in the world? And as I attract other people into this canoe with me, that we can go and serve clients, like how do I want them to represent us? And we came up with 5 values, which I'd love
Yeah,
to share
absolutely.
because I think first one is
Hmm.
relentlessly generous. And so we're givers and we're relentless about it. We're going to give and give and give and give. And my hope is, in this interview, I'll share some nuggets and we'll give you some resources to put in the show notes and folks afterwards. I know that the math takes care of itself. And if you're a Zig Ziglar fan like I am, there's a great quote: everything you want in life, if you just help enough other people get what they want. And so that's what we lead with. Our second one is being vulnerably trustworthy. So, you channel your inner Brene Brown, you show up as a whole person at work. Like, people have spouses and kids and people get sick and life is stressful and family always comes first. So that's something that I certainly lead with. I want our fractional executives to understand both internally and with clients, be your whole selves. The third core value is enthusiastically fun. And then I'm gonna sprinkle in a few dad
By all
jokes here
means.
because that's part of how we get to live this value. Like, and I was a math major too, and I love parallel lines. Like, they have so much in common, but it's really a shame that they're never going to meet. And hell, I got one more for you. Do you know what a balloon's least favorite type of
No
music
idea.
is? Pop music.
Yeah,
So we like to have fun at work, and I think that humanizes us and also makes it more enjoyable when you can get a laugh
sure.
in every meeting, or at least a groan. Our other 2 values are flexibly learning and independently productive. And so, we're
Mhm.
grown-ups. We don't micromanage our fractional executives. You don't need to micromanage them either. They're going to get things done and know how to do it efficiently and effectively.
Mhm.
And we have a growth mindset. We're learning and growing, relentlessly curious and trying new things. There's all sorts of new AI tools and other ways of doing business that we try to bring to bear for our
So,
clients.
why was it important 3 months in the start of your business to define your core values?
I think one of the most important reasons is because it gives you, a razor or a lens at which to identify people who you
Hmm.
don't want to work with, whether in my business as a fractional executive slash
Mm.
employee or as a client, you know, and there are definitely been people who failed one of those things or more for various reasons. And I was like, well, that was easy. We're going to move on to the next one. This isn't somebody that we want to do business
Now,
with.
you mentioned relentlessly generous as your key core value. I'm curious, how do you operationalize this, especially when negotiating contracts with, say, Fortune 500 clients who might want to exploit that level of generosity?
Yeah. Question. One of the ways we operationalize it is by giving away a lot of things for free on our website. We have a lot of free resources. I am one of my top 5 strengths is learner, and I'm kind of like a hoarder of tools. And I did a little like 5 free toolkits somebody shared on LinkedIn earlier today.
Mhm.
Well, this is cool. Like, yeah, 13-week rolling cash flow. Yeah, I'll take that. Okay. And so one of it is if somebody has a problem and we can solve it with a do-it-yourself
Mhm.
resource, we're just going to give it to them. You know, in negotiations in particular, I'm a big believer that the goal of any deal is to like get the first deal done so that you can do the second, the third, the fourth, and find more ways to work together. If somebody's going to rake us over the coals and try to take advantage of us in that first deal or negotiation, you're probably not going to want to do the second one, you know? And I've been listening to a great audiobook by a guy, Jefferson. His last name. He's a lawyer in Texas. It's all about communication. And he says, the goal is never to win an argument. Like, if you win an argument, what you're really doing is winning the right to go apologize later because you were probably a jerk. The goal is to untangle it and to understand the other person's point of view. And that's kind of my view in negotiations and business relationships too. Like, it's a positive sum game. It's not Pepsi versus Coke. It's like, how can we grow this pie and help you and help the fractional and help client and help us and help Max go to college in 15 years or whatever. That's kind of the goal.
You also mentioned your wave-borne bankruptcy. I'm sure it taught you a few lessons, perhaps one about cash conversion cycles. And if so, how do you now help SaaS founders calculate their true customer acquisition cost timeline when scaling, especially, and get them to look beyond your CAC metrics?
For sure. Great question. And there's a few things layered in there. I think the CAC-to-LTV ratio is really important. Like, needs to be at least 3 or 4 to 1. So if it costs you $100 to acquire a customer, then they should be paying you at least 300 or 400 over the lifetime. The more, the better, though. If it can cost you 100 and they're going to pay you $10,000 like that, that's great, man. How many? How do I put more $100 bills into that box and get out those clients? And just to touch on like the cash conversion cycle, understanding the like weekly, monthly flow of cash in and out of the business, as well as like, is there a seasonal nature? Like when I was in the sunglass business, it was super seasonal. 80-90% of our revenue came in between May and September. We sold like no pairs in October. We might get a little bit for the holidays, but then in January, we needed a bunch of cash to go pay Italy to make the sunglasses. And we had to put half of it in January, half of it in April. They deliver it. And then I thought I could show up in May to surf shops and eye doctor's offices, and they'd pay me for the 2,400 pairs of sunglasses. They said, oh, no, we'll do net 30. And the first time I heard this, I was like, okay, cool. And like awkwardly walked to my car. I had to Google on like Investopedia, like, what's net 30 mean? And I was like, oh, I paid for 30 days? Like, what? I was like, all right. But then net 30 turned into net 60 to net 90, and like it rained and we didn't make money. So like, oh, we'll pay you later. That was really, really hard. One of the things that I now do in business is like, people pay on the front end of the month, and we send it in till the 20th. It's due on the 1st for the work we're going to go do for the next 30 days. And the word tip is an acronym actually, and it stands for to ensure promptness. When you pay people on the front end, it's to make sure that they're going to help you. And if people have to chase you down to get you to pay 29 days later, that's not a healthy relationship. I think for SaaS businesses as well, like really understanding the different channels through which you can acquire leads, and then tracking the conversions throughout the funnel, whether it's product-led growth or low touch, high touch, dedicated touch, depending on the go-to-market motion. Knowing what channel they came from so that you have a realistic picture of what the conversion rate will be. It's always black and white. There's a little nuance and you don't quite have all the attribution that you need, but knowing that, hey, if we go spend an extra $10,000 on Google Ads, we're going to get X leads that are going to take, is it going to take 45 days or 120 days? Like the big difference. Or how much you can put in on the front end, when does it come back, and how much of that you're going to recycle and put in through that same channel versus experiment in other channels as well.
And as you help these SaaS founders with your fractional sales executives, you seem to emphasize cultural alignment more so over skill set. So I'm curious, is there a assessment or a framework that you use in order to ascertain that degree of alignment?
Yeah, great question. I'm a big fan of both the Clifton Strengths Finder assessment to kind of understand what people's strengths are, as well as Gretchen Rubin has the 4 tendencies. Are you an upholder, an obliger, questioner, or a rebel? And with the cultural alignment with the companies, I believe it is largely an intuitive feel about how I feel about the salespeople and the folks I know at our fractional executive roster and in the client that we're talking to, with a little bit of nuance, maybe seasoning for the industry. So like we were recently talking to a client in the energy industry, selling to utilities who needed a fractional sales leader. And that industry is very much like an old boys club, and you got to know them and kind of take crap from one another. And, it's relationship based. And if you say the wrong thing, they're not going to talk to you. Like,
Yeah.
it's not going to work out great. And so like we had somebody in mind for them, but ultimately decided like it wasn't a good culture fit because he was a little too high energy and outgoing, and they just sensed that it might not play well in that industry. Whereas another example, somebody who was selling B2B to real estate companies had a background in real estate, like kind of knew that industry, how to talk the lingo, the vocab words. And that was kind of a home run slam dunk. However many sport analogies you want to put in one sentence. Yeah.
So, in terms of the, I guess, gut feel, is this purely based on your experiences that informs that perspective, or is there more to it than that?
Yeah, I think there's some nuance to it. When we first started Malloy Industries, the first 10 to 50 fractional executives, they were all people I had worked with. They were close friends, colleagues. I knew who they were, what they were like in the trenches. As we've grown about 365 plus fractional executives, they're not all people I've known for 10 years and worked closely together. So part of it comes from who referred them in, as well as my team's interaction with them. So like we have a member manager, chief of staff who does a lot of the communication as we're doing the matchmaking. And I think that plays a role. We're also much more hands-on in the interactions with a first-time matched fractional executive versus folks who've been on 3 or 4 projects with us. I know they're phenomenal. I can tell Tina, our chief of staff, to make the connection and like not do anything. It's the flow from there. The team that I trust, that Gossam or Hillary or Karen is going to do a phenomenal job. And then we also check in on a monthly basis with the client and the fractional. Hey, how's it going? Is there anything we can do more of, less of, start doing, stop doing, so that we can maximize the successful impact of those.
I believe as you work with clients, you use a sales scalability scorecard. Would that be correct? Yeah. Which looks at about 6 pillars, if I remember correctly. And I'm curious if you could walk us through them, but also which pillar do you find companies consistently overestimate their competency in?
That's a great question. And so we do have, and I'll share this in the show notes too, that folks can make a copy of it and kind of use it as a DIY. Business model clarity, sales processes and methodologies, the customer relationship management system, your CRM, your performance metrics and analysis, the sales team and training, and then sales technology tools. I think the one where people overestimate the most is going to be the business model clarity. And thinking that like, oh yeah, we've nailed our ICP. We know exactly who we're selling to, and we just need to get in front of more of them. But that's not always the case. In some cases, there is ambiguity, or who you've been trying to sell to. Like the reason they're not converting so well is because it's not actually the right persona, or maybe it's not the right stakeholder within an enterprise sale organization. You just sell a different title, a different department. On the flip side, I would say most of our clients and the entrepreneurs that we talk to, like they know if their CRM is good or if it's kind of garbage in, garbage out. In some cases, like they don't even have a CRM. Like, okay, well, we can start there. And on the performance metrics and analysis, like we'll look at the conversion rates, the average deal size, the sales cycle length, what the CAC, the customer acquisition cost is, the lifetime value. A lot of companies don't have a very clear picture of the CAC. They kind of wave their hand. Well, we spent this money on this. We did these many trade shows. We bought this list. We're doing these things to generate ads, but it's not clear. So that's something that we can also come in and help standardize some of the reporting, that where the data sources are, so that they get a clearer picture. And there may also be ways to kind of upsell, cross-sell, or even downsell throughout the funnel to recover some of that. Like the concept of like a self-liquidating offer, where it's a small ticket thing that they're buying on the front end, but it covers the cost of the traffic. If somebody buys your $27 ebook, whatever, and it costs you $25 to Zuckerberg to get that, have an email address of a buyer. Buyer is way better than an email address of a lead or a prospect, somebody who may or may not be interested in you. They have gotten their credit card. They have paid you money once, even if it was a small ticket. it is like 9 times easier to get somebody who has already paid you money to pay you more money than to get a new stranger on the internet to pay you money for the first time.
I'm curious, as you to get people to go through the scorecard, is there a diagnostic process that you use to prove that gaps exist?
Do you mean before or after
After
they
they
fill
fill
out
out
the
the
scorecard?
scorecard?
Yeah. And so it's built into the kind of formulas there. And it, for folks that know,
Okay.
it's a Google sheet, where we have 6 pillars, 3 questions each. You're going to rate
Mhm.
them on a 1 through 5, and then we're going to give you a report card. And so it spits out like, maybe you got an A in business model clarity, but
Mhm.
maybe you overestimated, but you got an F in CRM because you don't even have one, and a D in sales technology tools because you're not really
Mhm.
using any tools and you have no idea what you're actually paying for on a subscription basis or how the team's using it. And so that shines a spotlight basically on the areas where
Mhm.
there's the least maturity. And the goal is not to get straight A's, by the way, on this test. It's to figure out like, okay, where are we doing the worst?
Okay.
But then also in talking with me about it, what are the low hanging fruit? Like if we bring somebody in 1 month, what can we turn around and, bump you up a few percentage points in
Okay.
those
So
categories?
really, if a client were to overestimate their competency in any one particular area, it would really come out in more of a ongoing conversation as opposed to school.
Yeah. And a lot of times that first month of working with a new client, we're putting the whole business up on the mechanics, right?
Sure.
We want to see everything. Show me your ICP documentation, the customer discovery notes, the research that you've done, proof that the pricing model is clear and, you have kind of a Goldilocks pricing. And we'll drop this nugget in there too. I'm a big fan of having 3 offers that kind of good, better, best. If you only have 2 pricing offers,
Okay.
it's good or bad. Good, better, best works. And if you price it where, let's say the base package is, $100, there's 1x, 2.2x, and then 5x. So you should have like $100 offer, a $220 offer, and a $500 offer. You can
Mhm.
start with whatever the one is, but not like that. You're usually going to get people to pick the middle one, kind of the goal. But then you want to paint the picture of what's the Cadillac version. If money wasn't an object, what are all the things they could get from you? And you'd be surprised that some people will pick the higher ticket offer. There's another strategy too. If you have an existing customer base, let's say that's paying $100 a month for something, there's a subset of them who would pay you $500 or even $1,000 or even $5,000 if you had a much higher ticket thing. And let me get the math straight. If you get 20% of those people to pay you $500, you just doubled your annual revenue. 20% conversion of existing people to new offer, complimentary, maybe upgrade on the current thing. Then if you get 20% of them, which is 4% of the total group, to pay you $2,500, you just added another. None of that one's going to double it or like 1.5 it because we already doubled it. But the math is like it grows a lot when you have those higher ticket
Okay.
things that your best customers. And again, you shouldn't be like. Again, it's the first time I'm saying this, Vinay. Like you shouldn't shove all of these things like buy this, buy this, buy this. If you firmly believe in your product or service so much that you're doing your clients a disservice by not giving them more value, then it's a
Certainly.
sales pitch.
Yeah.
It's I care about you. I want your life to be easier. I built this thing, and yeah, you're going to pay me more money, but you're going to get 5 or 10x
Mhm.
of return on that investment. Should be a
Certainly.
no-brainer.
I remember when we were speaking earlier, you mentioned that you require end of week reports from all your fractionals. Are there, I guess, three specific data points in these reports that best predict client relationship longevity? And if so, could you tell us why they matter?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been doing this for almost 4 years, and we've had a few hiccups with clients over the years, including a big one last summer, which led to the creation of this end of week report, where 3 key points are: here's what I did this week, key meetings, action items, things that were accomplished. Here's what I'm doing next week, key meetings, what the priorities are. And then here's where I'm stuck. And Mrs. Client, I would really like you to review this deliverable and approve it, or I need you to give me access to this system. And then the bonus one would be we also have them include their upcoming availability for the next week and any known vacation times when they're off, holidays, things with their kids. And what this solves is communication gaps. And all of our work is remote. We're not Deloitte consultants flying out Monday morning, coming home Thursday afternoon. We're working from home. We, spouse and kids in the background. And if you don't have a reliable communication cadence, the client things are gonna, get misaligned. And if every Friday, or at least every Monday morning, they're getting a report from us, hey, here's all the things I'm working on, and it goes to the client. It also goes to me and my chief of staff, because we check on these weekly. And, I would say every once in a while, something doesn't come in on Friday, but as soon as it gets there by Monday, we're cool. But if Monday end of day and we haven't seen it, like, we're reaching out to Fractional, hey, are you okay? We're like, why don't we see the end of week report? And we want the clients to expect it, because every action you take in business, it either builds trust or erodes trust. And if you set an expectation, you do something and you don't do it, and you don't tell me you didn't do it, or you didn't tell me as soon as you knew you weren't going to meet the deadline, then I start to trust everything you say a little bit less. And I'm a firm believer that business moves at the speed of trust. And so we want all of our folks on our team to be building trust with their actions and how they interact in the market and with their clients.
I'm also thinking back to something you said, which was that you conducted 500 plus customer discovery interviews. And I'm curious, what unexpected pattern did you see emerge about CEO pain points that directly informed your tiered pricing strategy?
Yeah, phenomenal question. And I've talked to so many people about this, both CEOs and investors and fractional executives, and I'm convinced that fractional executives are the future of work. CEOs are perpetually stretched too thin. They have 17 hair on fire problems. They're wearing 15 different hats on any given day, maybe even hour. As you look at their inbox, like, oh, this is marketing, I got a product thing, I got operations, I got this, I got another investor thing. Oh, I should drop everything and do the investor stuff. But then what's going to do our marketing? How are we going to close our sales if I got to go do the dog and pony show? And also a feeling of isolation that CEOs feel, of just like, all of the weight of the world is on my shoulders. People don't understand it. And we really try to bring in an empathetic leader. Most of the folks that we work with have worked with several growth stage startup companies, and many of them have been the CEOs, and empathizing with that journey, I think, is really important. I would say another really big thing that I've learned through all these customer discoveries is that the CEOs, they're problem aware. They know that, like, they shouldn't still be doing payroll themselves at this point. And they know that, their founder's story and charisma was great to acquire the first batch of customers, but you're not going to go 10x your sales with just me being me in the room. And they need a sales team with a scalable, repeatable process. They also know that, like, they're not actually salespeople. They just did it because they had to. But at some point, you don't have to do it anymore. You have the capital to hire an expert. You don't have to spend $360,000 on a annual salary, compensation, benefits, and all that. If you can spend 5, 10, 15K a month, get the exact expertise you need, and know that if you need less in a couple of months, you can ramp it down, or if you need more, you can ramp it up. I think a big part of the value prop is that flexibility. But what I found is a lot of CEOs, they know they have these problems. They're problem aware. They're not always solution aware. They're not necessarily talking to everybody and like, hey, who's the best fractional executive? I really know I need a fractional executive to solve my marketing problems or my, HR issues. They know that they don't want to be doing it anymore, but the old way of doing things, and our biggest competitor, is hiring full-time employees. And full-time executives cost a lot of money. It takes 3 to 6 months to write the posting, source a bunch of candidates, interview them, vet them, eventually hire, onboard, and then train, and then kind of getting them up to speed. Whereas so you talk to us in like a half an hour, we'll scope out the project. Within 3 to 5 days, we'll match you with fractional executive. They get started in a week or two, and if, God forbid, it doesn't work out, another thing that we offer as kind of a risk reversal is a 365-day warranty. We call it like the second match free guarantee. So at any point in the first year, the first person we matched you with doesn't work out, we'll come in, we'll understand why, we'll talk to you, understand maybe it's cultural communication, was there a skill set gap, and then we'll match you with a second one for free. We won't charge you anything to do that, because we want you to have access to the talent you need, kind of on demand, that's fast, flexible, and dependable.
So for those who are perhaps transitioning from founder-led sales, sorry, from founder-led sales to more of a fractional input or leadership, what would really be your playbook for the next 30 to 90 days, say, to prevent that revenue dip that usually tends to occur during a handoff?
Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to fumble that baton. And the first part of the playbook is asking the CEO, so what's your playbook? How have you been selling? Let me sit on a few calls and have you documented anything at all about how you sell your product or service? Because in some cases, the answer is no. They just do it and they kind of know it and they don't really have to prep for calls. And a lot of their initial sales have been to warm introductions or existing relationships because they know people who buy the thing that they're selling. So there's a matter of like taking what's in the founder's mind, putting it down on paper, and massaging it in a way that it doesn't require the founder's origin story, charisma, and relationships to close sales. Because the founder, and many of them wish, I just want to clone myself. If I could get me 49 other copies of me, we'd sell great in every state. Like, that's not how it works, man. Sorry, hate to break it to you, but like everybody else who sells your product or service is going to sell it differently than you do. And there's different ways to approach that. I think it depends on the go-to-market motion with the kind of low touch, high touch, dedicated touch. Like, are you selling to SMBs versus enterprise? What is the average contract value and the sales cycle length? All of these things play into how we want to build out that playbook, but it will typically be documenting what's been working. The fractional sales leader will begin to take some sales calls and kind of talk to people in the funnel to understand what works and what doesn't work as they're then iterating on some of those scripts, and also talking to the founder about what is the org chart for the sales team look like. Like, how many SDRs and AEs do we want to bring in at what point? How much capital is it going to cost in the short term? How do we think the revenue? Because if your sales cycle is 3 months, like you probably do a lot of things. If you have an 18-month sales cycle to like higher education, like, it's a different ball game and cost of capital to kind of build that out. And we will usually come in either before or after a seed round or a Series A round, and where we're at and what their bank account looks like, to be honest, in terms of how much they can invest in that sales team. Because in some cases, we need to transition out of founder-led sales so the founder can go do founder-led fundraising for the next 3 months, which is really the next 6 months. That's a little bit different of a scenario than, hey, I just closed a few $1 million. Let's go build a sales team. Okay, we can do that very easily. That's definitely.
I wonder if there's a conversation around asking CEOs, what's your time worth? And do you have like a time evaluation process that converts their hours into measurable revenue impact metrics?
I love that, man. This is great timing because tomorrow we're sending out one of our Business Bites newsletters all about the 4 types of time. I'm going to see if I can pull it up while we were talking.
You're right.
Here, yeah. And this is something too that I learned from Sahil Bloom and the 5 types of wealth, but he talks about time wealth. And when you think about your professional time, there are 4 different types of time. So there's creative time, which is like the second most common type of professional time, but it's too often like jammed in between other meetings. This is the time when you get into deep work and flow, you're creating, you're coding, you're building the business machine. You really need to prioritize this time. Too often it gets sucked up by management time, which is the number 1 most common type. And that's where you're in meetings, you're reading and sending emails, you got Slack messages, people, project management. And then there's ideation time, which is like the forgotten type of time where it's thinking time. New ideas are cultivated and grown here. You're brainstorming, maybe you're walking or journaling, in a hot shower for a long time. This stillness is really key to asymmetrical growth, because without ideation time, you're stuck in just linear growth, but you want the asymptote. And the 4th type of time is consumption time. And this is where new ideas are planted from reading, listening, group coaching, studying. Like, everything you create is downstream from something you consumed, because consumption time focuses on quality upstream inputs. And so I think a lot about time in how CEOs are using it. and how their time would be better spent paying somebody else to do their administrative work. Because if you're the one doing the admin work, guess what? You're the admin. And now you're doing $10 an hour work or $25 an hour work, where you could be doing $100, $1,000, $10,000 kind of order of magnitude. What's the impact on the business that you as a CEO are working on?
Do you ask them to put this down on some sort of worksheet in order to kind of bring home the point, so to speak?
It depends, because there is a willingness to do a time audit and an extreme aversion to do a time audit. I am of the mindset, like I use toggle time tracking every day to report my timesheet to myself. And so that I can do a monthly time audit, look at what do I want to cut, systematize, or delegate. And when you have a routine of doing that, you continue to shuffle up and focus on higher order work and surround yourself with other people who their zone of genius, their area of expertise is the stuff that you don't like to do. You know, like I don't like to send out invoices and remember to check in with everybody and all of the things. I'm very much the idea guy, the high energy and enthusiasm, but I'm not the follow through. And that's why my chief of staff is an amazing follow through and makes all of the magic happen. And I deeply miss her right now while she is on a 2-week vacation in the Mediterranean. Yeah.
Okay. So there is a mind shift that needs to occur. So again, I'd love your take on how you coach resistant founders on delegation, especially those who are saying, if I want it done right, or at least have that kind of bias. Is there a neurological framing technique that you use to help them overcome that bias?
So I am also a recovering perfectionist. I remember growing up, like I got straight A's in most things. And freshman year of high school, first quarter, I got 2 B pluses in English and biology. And my mom requested a parent-teacher conference with both of those teachers to understand what they were doing wrong, that her son hadn't gotten an A in their class. And so so I get it. And like, okay, perfect, great. But perfect is the enemy of done. And as an entrepreneur, there's so many things to get done. One of the best heuristics or mental models that I try to give to founders that I'm coaching is that 80% done by somebody else is 100% freaking awesome.
Yeah.
All right. And I'm not saying deliver terrible work products and let quality slip, but somebody might have painted that thing blue and you would have done it in green, but like, does it really matter? And another leadership principle is that people support what they help build. And so you can't be on a mountaintop just telling everybody what to do everything. And then if they don't do exactly how you want it, even though you didn't do a good job explaining it, you're going to, yell at them for it. Like, that's a terrible place to work. Nobody's going to want to do that. If you do a better job at communicating the definition of done, so like, what does success look like for this project? We're here, and they call this the 10-80-10 rule, where the leader is here for the first 10%. They explain why does this matter in the grand scheme of the business? How does it align with our North Star metric? And by the way, everybody should have a North Star metric for their company, and people should know what it is. And in our staff meeting every week, we say, hey, who can tell me what a North Star metric is? Like, everybody knows it's gross profit. We talk about it, and then we talk about what did you do this week to help the business get closer to that North Star metric. And so you explain why this matters, what does success look like, and then you get out of the way. You let your employee, your team member, your fractional executive, your intern go run with the ball for 80% of the time. They have questions year round, but you're not looking over the shoulder. You do come back at the last 10% to kind of proofread their work. You may change some of the wording. You might tweak something to help get it over the finish line. But you've suddenly cut yourself out of 80% of the project, especially the heavy lifting things that is not the best use of your time, when you could be, talking to potential clients or investors or new team members. Like, that's the work that only you as the CEO can do. Somebody else can create the marketing.
You've helped companies scale from 2 million to 20 million plus in ARR. I would imagine that at, say, each 5 million increment, that would require a different way of thinking about operational infrastructure, as well as on your side, the fractional expertise. Could you kind of talk us through how you view it, both from a client perspective as well as from the fractional expertise, and how you go about guiding founders and CEOs through that transition at each stage?
Yeah, it's definitely a transition, and there are different kind of constraints that come up depending on the stage. And oftentimes in the beginning, it is throwing spaghetti at the wall and figuring out what sticks and kind of getting a little lucky. And then, all right, how do we replicate that luck? And let's say that gets you to 1 million. Maybe that even gets you to 5 million. But to go from 5 to 10 million, it's an engine. Like, you are building a business machine that has predictable inputs, moderately predictable conversion rates, and then the outputs with a relatively estimated time horizon of how long it's going to take to go through this process. And it may take a while hanging out at the $5 million range to figure out something where, you know, there's a joke that, like, in all other professions, it's called failure, but in marketing, it's called testing, you know, where a lot of marketing is, hey, we're testing things. And let's say you want to do, you know, Facebook ads, and you say, all right, we're going to spend, you know, $50 on these 10 different ads. And a week later, you look at it and you only made $250, just as an example. Somebody might think, oh, that was a failure. We lost half our money. But if you look at the details, what actually happened was 9 of the ads produced 0 sales. 1 of the ads cost you $50 and you made $250. You tested and you found the thing that is a 5x multiplier. Now what you want to do is take $50,000 and put it in there to get $250,000. And you want to continue to do it until this magic money box stops spitting out a 5-to-1 return. And while you're, then this is one thread, you now also have to be testing several other different types of ads on this platform, ads on, you know, maybe YouTube or Google ads, or going to events and conferences, trade shows, doing online webinars. There are, I think, 19 different traction channels. If you guys have read that book here, but I'll make a note. There's a whole bullseye framework based on that 19 traction channels. I'll share that with you, Benay, to put in the show notes, because it explains, you don't have to read the whole book, which is great. It links to a couple articles in 30 minutes. You can understand what the 19 are. Here's an example. 4 to 7 of those 19 are like definitely viable opportunities for your business that there should be some multi-threaded testing on to go from 5 to 10. And then when you get there, you got to kind of look around and say, okay, perhaps who can I partner with? Like, who's already selling to my ideal client profile? Because if you get to 10 million, you have that ICP pretty well locked in. And understanding, can we, you know, have some channel partnerships? Can we like do some co-branded webinars? Can we try to stack some of our, or bundle some of our services together? There are a lot of ways to then acquire more. And in the 10 to 20 range, you also start to look at product development and like, what are the complementary products and services that people who are buying widget A might also buy widget B or C. And maybe you have 1 or 2 of these, but there's definitely opportunity to, again, increase that lifetime value by adding to the value you deliver. You know, like, we specialize in fractional sales executives for B2B SaaS companies. We also have fractional operations executives and marketing and HR and finance. Like, we can help lead any of the business departments. And so as you go up that scaffolding, like, we'll help a lot on the front end with sales and marketing. As you get higher up, you need help with operations and maybe some sales enablement, making sure that people have the right tools and technology to be successful and efficient in their roles. And then you also get to the HR function, because you are bringing on more full-time employees, and the CEO should not be doing payroll past, honestly, never should you be doing payroll.
Yeah.
As far as I'm like, I was like, I'm the only person who's a W-2. Everybody else is 1099. I'm like, I don't do the payroll. I never did. I hired Tina and she does our payroll for me, you know, and she also pays all of our fractional executives, does all our invoices. So, you know, being aware of like what is outside of your strength zone, your zone of genius, and who you want to surround yourself with, folks who can both do it themselves and also build repeatable systems and processes. You know, if you may not be a standard operating procedure czar who loves having SOPs for everything, you need to have somebody in your team who does. And what they do is create a lot of redundancy. And if somebody quits or gets hit by a bus or takes 3 weeks off to go to Fiji, or 2 weeks to go to a Mediterranean cruise with her family, Tina, you know, we're doing just fine, because we have, you know, I think over 100 SOPs documented at this point, that different people on the team are cross-trained and can wear different hats. That's what's required to sustainably scale above
Okay.
10 million.
So documentation SOPs are critical, but would I be right in saying that to once you hit your limit, so to speak, in terms of a particular threshold, you really need to bring someone in with a fresh mindset and different set of eyes, so to speak, to begin to build the systems to allow for that opportunity to level up. Would that be a fair comment? Yeah.
Absolutely a fair comment. And in having that outside perspective of somebody who's grown other companies, but doesn't know that much about your business. So they're not going to be biased and tell you the baby's beautiful
Yeah.
because they've been there the whole time. They're going to be like, what do you mean you don't have this thing in place? Like, oh,
Mm.
well, when you start to surround yourself with people who can predict what you're, 1 to 6 months away from getting into trouble or having risks, but you can now sidestep it
Mhm.
by planning for it. That is a huge value add that is stuff you
Mm.
would have never known because you've never gotten to, that part in
So,
before.
how would you adapt the who, not how kind of mindset or framework when building out fractional teams for, say, bootstrapped companies versus a venture-backed SaaS company?
Yep. Great question. And there definitely is a different game for bootstrap versus venture backed. When you're venture backed, as soon as you accept the first amount of funding, you're on
Mhm.
the treadmill. And every 18 to 24 months, you got to be doubling, raising more money and doing these things. And in those instances, cash is a little bit easier. I'm going to put in quotes, easier to come by. And therefore, you want to spend it to create that growth so that you can then reinvest it and have a compelling story
Mhm.
to tell investors. That is a different game than if you're a bootstrapped founder who owns 100% of your business. You've never have any plans to take outside people's money. It's all your money. So you're going to be
Mhm.
pretty thoughtful about when does it make sense to spend it. And interestingly, it depends the personal life and like stage of life that people are at, because there are times when if you have small children that you want to ramp down work a little bit and like spend more time with them. But then maybe your kids go off to college and you're an empty nester, like, all right, man, ramp it up. Maybe you don't want to pay people as much to do these things. But if you realize, oh, I only have like 2 summers left with my kids before they go to college and may or may not come back, then it's worth buying
Mhm.
back some of that time. And it goes back to the time versus money equation we are talking about earlier. If you have an abundance of money, but not an abundance of time, use the money
Mhm.
to buy time. Early on, when you're bootstrapping stuff, if you don't have a lot of money, like, yeah, maybe you are working really hard and doing, website design at 2 a.m. because you don't want to pay somebody, to make your website. But maybe if you have $1,000 or a couple grand, like you can make your
Mhm.
website for pretty cheap. That's not our bread and butter, but like we know people who make websites that are not
Mhm.
$40,000 websites. They're like $4,000 or $5,000 websites. And so just being thoughtful about when to invest that money, like how much cash is flowing in. You know, I'm a proponent of if you have positive monthly cash flow, like 10 to 20% should go into savings, 10% should go into taxes that you just like know you're going
Mhm.
to pay taxes later and you should save it. You should maybe pay yourself some of the money, but then you should have a let's reinvest in the business fund. And as that fills up, okay, how are we going to use it to then make us more money and or make
Mhm.
us more time? Because time is really the scarcest human resource that you
Certainly.
can get back.
Okay. You talked, or at least alluded to the fact that there is a level of risk management as you go into these engagements, and I wonder if there's a like a post-mortem analysis framework when that you would use when fractional engagements fail, and what would you say from your experience to date would be the top three root causes?
Great question. So we talked earlier about the end of week report, and we built that last August. We had a project fail in June/July of last year, and that's probably the last one that we've had fail, knock on wood. And it was a communication issue. It was really, it was the first month, and like 2 weeks in, I got a call from the client being like, "Hey, I don't really know what he's doing," and I was like, "Oh, okay." Like, and I called and I was like, "Hey, just want to know what you're doing. Like, can you communicate a little bit better?" He kind of like threw some lame excuses, and I was like, "Oh, okay." And then, like 2 weeks later, I got another call from the client that like still don't know what he's doing, and I talked to him, and coming out of that call, I was like, "Well, we're gonna fire him," and like he is not the solution. And then I stepped in and like basically was their fractional sales executive for a month because I felt bad because this guy did such a bad job. We did the second match free guarantee. By August, we found somebody new. So like communication is going to be the number one thing. We've had I'm not going to say these projects fail, but like, why do they end? It's because they decide they want to hire somebody full time. And like, we know that that is not us. We've had, I think, one instance over 100 plus projects where the fractional was then hired full time. What typically happens is we help with the position description, the interviewing, the vetting of candidates. We'll onboard and train them, and then we kind of ride off into the sunset. And that's a natural kind of course of growth and a positive sign. Yeah. And you asked for 3, and I'm trying to think of like what the third one might be. I'm going to say it's a good thing, but like, I can't think of other reasons why things like fail or, yeah. We have a very high success rate of matching, there's that one from last summer, but beside that, there are other ones that like blow up in our face or, it's not going well. And we start with a 3-month engagement knowing that this isn't a 5 or 40-year contract together. It's like, it's 3 months. We do it month to month. We check in. If the work that you need, like sometimes we will build something and then it's good. It can kind of run and like, you need us. We had a client we worked with 2 years ago who came back and said, hey, we hired some new staff. They don't know how to use the Airtable technology and system you built us. Like, we pay you a couple grand and just like come in and train our folks. We're like, yeah, sure, no problem.
So do you include termination clauses in your fractional contracts to protect both parties from misaligned expectation?
Yeah. So either party can opt out with 10-day notice. And this is why we kind of check in on the 20th of the month. We did actually have somebody call me on like the 30th of June last year to opt out before July 1st. And I accepted it. And it was because they ran out of funding and they just didn't have the cash. They thought some things were going to close, but it didn't. And I love her. We're still good friends and she has bounced back from that. But it was like, we need to just, take a break because I can't pay you if we were to start again next month. And so I understand that. Like, I've been on the dip, I've been on the rise up, and we'll continue to kind of ride this ride with my own business and with our clients.
You talked about instances where an organization might hire someone full-time for a particular role. So I'm assuming there's a degree of fractional succession planning, or at least a process for it to ensure there's knowledge transfer before the engagement comes to a conclusion. Could you kind of walk us through, at least in a broad sense, as to what that entails and what documentation you mandate?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a great framework called the do and document process, which I'll share a link with you, Vinay, you can put in the show notes. It involves using tools like Loom and Scribe to have the fractional literally do the thing that they're currently doing, document it by kind of giving color commentary via video, and then Scribe spit out a line-by-line SOP with screenshots of all the things they did to then kind of put in either a Google Sheet or a Notion database so that when new people come in, they're able to go through that list of SOPs, understand what the processes were, and also the color commentary, the audio, I find is very helpful the first time. You don't need to watch it the 4th time you do the task, but maybe you forgot what step 7 was, so you can look at the SOP and, okay, I know how to do this. That is one of the best ways that we go about kind of documenting those processes. We're also pretty tech stack agnostic in terms of using Google Docs or Sheets or Microsoft or Notion or Asana. That like we'll document how processes and systems are expected to flow using whatever tech stack the client is currently using. In some cases, we'll recommend, hey, Notion's pretty good, we should probably check this out, but are pretty flexible with product management tools.
I'm sure there is a degree of referrals, your newsletter, podcast, guesting, etc., that works in your favor in terms of getting the word out there and awareness about your service. But what would you say has worked really well more recently in terms of getting people who would not necessarily be aware or of the solutions that you provide of your service and how it could benefit?
Yes, absolutely. The Hawaiian shirts, the neck. And so I'm wearing a nice Tommy Bahama Hawaiian shirt today. We have custom Malloy Industries branded Hawaiian shirts. And anyone who makes a referral to us, whether they're one of our fractional executives or somebody else that we meet, gets a Hawaiian shirt. And these are very loud and proud Hawaiian shirts that people are both very excited to get as well as when you wear them to events, it is something worth remarkable. It's remarkable, like a Seth
Yep.
Godin purple cow, if you will. Like, who's that guy in that Hawaiian shirt? I'm gonna go talk to him. And so I think that has helped a lot. And I'm a pretty good networker and building relationships at events. And what I have found has worked best over the past several months is that I'll go to an event and I'm not necessarily meeting a future client there, but I'm meeting 5 future referral sources of other people who know people that they're going to talk to in the next couple of months, who are going to be problem aware that they're wearing too many hats and they're stressed out and they shouldn't still be doing stuff, but they're not solution aware, but the person I met is. And so they help kind of guide the problem aware entrepreneur to the solution aware path. And then they introduce them to me where I can kind of guide them to the fractional executive who will help solve their problems. That has worked phenomenally well and is definitely our most effective. It's referrals. It's, people talk to me and then I'm pretty good about following up and giving them affordable blurb. And I like to make dad jokes and Hawaiian shirts references. And let's see, I got another joke for you too at this point, because we're almost done here. Do you know what happens to doctors when they get
No idea.
they lose their patience?
Certainly. So beyond standard sales KPIs, are there perhaps another 3 unconventional leading indicators, if I could put it that way, that you would track to predict 12-month revenue sustainability for SaaS companies that are looking to scale?
Yeah, great question. One thing I would look at is the NPS scores for, Net Promoter Scores for existing clients, because there's a ton of focus on it. Vinay, are you familiar with the revenue architecture, like the Bowtie model?
I have come across it. Yes, it's been a while. Yeah.
Yes. So for the audience, if you think about the traditional sales funnel, that is basically the left side of the bow tie, and you're trying to get them to convert, to have a mutual commit, which is kind of the dot on the bow tie. The right side is about onboarding, retention, and expansion. And so I think that a really undervalued part of your revenue architecture is how well are you retaining clients and how well are you expanding, and like, what do you have in place to take that customer who's been paying you $100 a month for several months and actually have like a 30 to 60 minute strategic business review with them, to be a trusted advisor, to understand their business, to then be able to give them resources, advice, share some best practices from the industry. And oh, by the way, you mentioned these 5 things that you need to feel more pride, confidence, and excitement in your business. That thing number 4, we actually do that with our other product. Would it be helpful if I gave you a demo of how that product could solve thing number 4 you need help with? That is some version of what I just said exists. I think they're on a great path. If people are like, I have no idea what you're talking about, we do none of that, that's a red flag.
Brilliant.
Or a place that we can help and kind of build out that customer success expansion function. We have fractional customers.
I meant to ask you with the prior question, you've talked about networking and referrals as a big source of business leads, as it were. But is there perhaps a challenge that you face in terms of communicating what you do? If so, what would that be?
Great question, Nate. I think one of the biggest challenges is the educational marketing. So for people who are building things that your customers are not necessarily used to buying, people are not necessarily used to buying fractional executives. They don't always know what that word means or how it fits into their HR strategy. And so figuring out ways to share case studies and tell stories and anecdotes such that people will start to understand, oh, okay, I could be like the hero in that story on that hero's journey. And another thing that I see a lot of people struggle with as well is talking about us. We are great at this. We got this award. We do that. We do this. People don't care. Talk about the problem, the pain point. Like, what are the things that your customers are struggling with such that you can come in and help solve them? But nobody wants a problem solved until they're aware of the problem. So, but for example, what time is it right now where you are in the world?
8 a.m., just past 8 a.m.
Great. So I asked a question that directed your attention where I wanted it to go. You looked down, you saw the clock. What are questions, dear listeners, that you can ask potential customers that will direct their attention to the problem, to the pain point that you help solve? Because once they're short-term memory aware of the problem, their brain starts to be, okay, how do I solve this? So they go from like problem unaware to problem aware to solution unaware to solution aware to product aware to then, okay, most aware, give me a good
Yeah.
offer and I'll buy
Doesn't
it.
it? But for you, as part of Malloy Consulting Group, is there a specific challenge that you face?
Yeah, I think it is the awareness of
Okay.
fractional executives and competing against
Hmm.
the status quo of
Okay.
full-time hiring. People think they need to hire
Right.
full-time executives.
Mhm.
That's our biggest
And
challenge.
in the space of scaling through fractional executives, do you find there's perhaps a couple of areas, aside from the awareness piece, a couple of areas that don't get talked about very much, don't get much airtime? If so, what would they be?
I think HR is one that doesn't get talked about enough. And like
Hmm.
having an on-demand HR director who can deal with the foundational HR things for compliance and
Hmm.
risk purposes and like onboarding new people and processing payroll and having an employee handbook. But there's also there's an HR complaint and somebody has to
Hmm.
call a phone number, and it can't always be the CEOs, especially if the CEO might be involved in the HR complaint. And so that's something we've helped a lot of companies, that
Right.
on-demand HR director. It's a different model than kind of the fractional sales or marketing. We typically just sell a
Hmm.
bucket of hours and you draw it down as you need them. Usually there's some stuff at the beginning we'll start with, but then, we just have Jen Ricky and she's our HR person. So we call her if we need her. And if you're hiring people, we're like, Jen has two clients, I think, right now with us that she does their payroll every 2 weeks. And one of them is getting ready to hire a full-time HR person because they have grown 50 employees
Hmm.
and need, even more help. And so she's helping with that transition planning.
And to wrap up, if you were listening to this episode, what would you say would be your main top takeaway?
Great question. If you're listening to this episode, my main takeaway would be that what got you
Hmm.
here won't get you there. And you need to ask who, not how, to fill your team with people who are smarter than you, especially fractional executives who can give you the results you need at a fraction of the cost at a full-time executive to scale your business and
Okay.
10x your.
If people would like to know more, connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
Yeah, I'd love to connect more. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can also send me an email. It's mike@malloyindustries.com, MALLOYINDUSTRIES.com. Our website's malloyindustries.com. We're all in that the future of work is fractional. And if you go to malloyindustries.com/pod, there'll be some resources there
Okay.
for podcast
Right. We'll
listeners.
include links to that in the show notes. Mike, thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah. Thank you, Vinay. I appreciate it.